Hello, welcome everybody. My name is Matt Emery. I am your host today. I work with Self-Publishing School, Chandler Bolt, now selfpublishing.com. We're going to be diving in here in just a minute and talking about how to write and publish your life story, the three core elements of a memoir, a memorable memoir that actually sells copies. Before we dive in, where is everybody tuning in from? I personally am in Austin, Texas, and it's writing weather out there today. It's kind of dreary, kind of gloomy. It's starting to get a little chilly here. By chilly, I mean it's probably maybe in the 70s today. So we're bundled up. For me, this is the perfect writing time of year. I kind of have like a sowing seeds in the spring and then nurturing those things in the summer, and then in the fall and the winter, it's like, all right, it's harvest time. Welcome, you guys. Susan in Detroit, Carla just down the street in San Marcos, Devin in Omaha. Awesome. Actually, quite a few Texans today. Welcome, Linda, Lauren, Debbie, Minnehaha, Bob, Anastasia. Awesome. We got a full crew today. Well, this is my favorite thing to talk about. My memoirs, life stories, autobiographies, those kinds of things. Because I think each of us has such a story to tell, but it's really hard for us to know how to tell our own stories. And sometimes we don't realize as we tell our own stories what people really latch onto and what other people get the most out of when we're just telling our story. And so that's what we're going to talk about today is more than just how to write a memoir, but how to identify how your life story itself is unique and what sort of lessons, what kind of stories will lead to this sort of congruous, this unified story throughout your whole book. So I didn't really know what was most impactful about my story. I mean, my first book, and I'll introduce this in a minute, was called Where the Rubber Meets the Road. It was about a year that I lived in a van and traveled the country searching out there for whatever was missing in my life. And I crashed into Jesus. It's kind of my testimony of sorts. And about a year ago, I was living in this house and I was running it as an Airbnb, and this guy came in as a guest, and we would share our mornings together. We'd have our coffee, we'd talk about poetry, we'd talk about life. We talked about our views, and at this time, I was feeling very enthusiastic about my faith, which totally rubbed this guy the wrong way. So I was like, okay, pump the brakes on the whole faith talk, and I'm not going to go there that deep in this webinar either. And then a couple of months ago, we were working on a project together, and he says, and he was like, as atheist as they come. And he said to me, hey, by the way, I'm about 50 pages into The Detourist. I'm like, oh, cool. You enjoying it? He's like, yeah, I am. And I forgot to tell you, I believe in God now. You got me. It was such a surprise. And I realized like that was kind of why, a big reason, only in hearing that I really felt like, oh, I wrote this book. And it was successful. So I'm curious for you guys just to take like 20 seconds and think, what would be the conversation or the phone call? What would be the sentence that you hope to someday hear from somebody about the impact that your book has had on their life? So what would be the sentence that someone would utter to you about the impact that your book has had on their life? So think about that. I invite you to go ahead and put that in the chat too. These are always fun to read and kind of share, and also to say this is the spirit of this book. So if there's one thing that we're kind of leading toward in this memoir, as I tell my story, this is the sentence that I hope to hear from this. This is the review that I hope to hear from that. So share that in the chat. I am going to go off camera. I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to dive on in. I'll read some of these as they come through, but yeah, very curious to hear what you guys, why you're here, the type of book that you want to write. Lori says, this gave me hope and strength. Beautiful. Debbie said, you saved my life. I learned so much. I learned no matter what has happened, I can still be empowered. That's great, Linda. It's really good. Yeah, so keep those coming. Your book helped me find my own journey to heal my mental imbalance. That's good, Robert. Good stuff. So, writing and publishing your life story, the three core elements of a memorable memoir that actually sells copies. So, obviously, if we're going to put all this time and energy into telling our story, we really want to get it out there too. It might not be about selling copies, making money, and that's not the driving force behind this. But the more people that get your memoir in their hands and you've written it well, the more people are going to receive that message. Leslie said, I've started writing to understand myself in private. It's made all the difference. My walk with Jesus is closer. My faith is stronger, and I have such a peace. These are great. Wow, that was life altering. You helped me know how deeply loved I am by God. Good stuff, guys. So stick around to the end. I am going to move pretty quickly. I think I have something like 60 slides. I have a lot of things to share with you, but I am going to send my replay. I am going to send my notes. I'm going to send these slides. So if there's something you feel like, oh, I really want to go deeper on that, and Matt, you kind of breezed over it too quickly, and you didn't happen to grab a screenshot or anything, know that you're going to get a couple of ways to return to this information. So really quickly, a little bit about me. I am originally from Brighton, Michigan. I've been kind of writing since I was like 8 years old. And at that point, writing was more like letters to grandma. And it was like, Grandma, I hope you have a great and wonderful and splendid and terrific and superb and peculiar day. Just like trying to use all my new vocab words. But that was kind of where it began. But I really said that I wanted to write a book for the first time when I was 15 years old. So 2005. And yet 15 years later, 14 years later, I hadn't published anything. Finally, in the 15th year, I got a book published. That was January 2020. That same year, I wrote a second one. Launched a podcast for authors called Authority Figures. That's really intended for people like us that are here, like to help us see that our life experience and the things that we've gone through are enough to grant us authority on very different subjects. So you don't have to wait for somebody who is an expert, dub thee worthy of telling your story. That's what the Authority Figures podcast is all about. And then there's a third and a fourth book that I launched just back in September. All of them kind of the same self-help memoir type nature. So suffice it to say, I think that I'll be a good guide for you guys. I've located all the pits over the last 17 years. I have learned how to write a book that I'm excited to publish, excited to put my name on in 90 days, but by no means do you have to write it that quickly. My recent one, I took more like 9 months. And I've had now probably over 10,000 conversations with aspiring authors and found that most of us struggle with the exact same things. So these are my titles. The first one about living in the van, that was Where the Rubber Meets the Road. The most recent two are The Detourist and The Kaleidoscope. And all of them are really me telling my story and some of the things that I learned along the way. So first thing that we'll do before diving in is just get an understanding that there's a lot of different shapes and sizes that a memoir can come in. There's this whole spectrum where you have something that is largely storytelling. On the memoir side, it's entertaining. It's you going through your life history. It's fun. It's lighthearted generally. Actually, I'll take that back. Your memoir can be whatever tone your life has been. And then on the self-help side, we write about issues we are aware of because there are issues. I a lot of times think about my self-help memoirs as like a manual for my own life. Hey, if I ever fall down, if I ever am making some of these same old dumb mistakes, maybe I should go read my own book, because this was me sort of drawing the line and saying, I dealt with this stuff. I'm still dealing with this stuff. I'm aware of it. Here's how you can be aware of it. Here's how you can overcome it. It doesn't mean that you publish and suddenly your life changes and you no longer have those issues. But this spectrum helps people understand that maybe a memoir is more about stories, but lessons are caught along the way. The lessons are caught. On the self-help side, lessons are taught. And you're still using your life experience, but it's a little bit more teaching. So before we dive in, understand a book is a key to Narnia. You know, it's a place, it's a way to transform your life into something completely different. And all of our Narnias can and will and probably do look entirely different from each other. But I'm curious, just before we go in, what reason do you want to write a book in the first place? You know, I saw some of the reasons before. It might be for legacy. It might be something more professional, like I'd like to gain some authority or credibility or legitimacy. You know, Zig Ziglar said, my book was the most profitable thing that I ever did. And that would have been true if I never sold one copy. A lot of us do it for ourselves, you know, and who we become in the process of writing this book. There's a sense of fulfillment. There's a sense of purpose. Sometimes when people do it for business, it's for lead generation. Maybe some of you want to become speakers, and this is a really good way to elevate your voice, build some trust, kind of let people know what you're all about. But what is your reason? Tamika says impact. Beautiful. To entertain, to inform, to inspire. Sarah, that's great. Make people feel less alone. Impact. So these are really good. Whatever your reason is, a memoir can take so many different forms, but there are a couple of things that you really want to make sure exist in all memoirs. So these are the three elements of a memorable memoir. Number one, we think bigger. A truly memorable memoir is not all about you. And I'll explain what that means because that's a bit counterintuitive. But we'll go deeper on that in a minute. Lesson number two, you learn from fiction authors. So you captivate your readers with storytelling elements in your writing. And then lastly, this book skeleton method. This is how to organize your future bestseller. So we'll talk at the end a little bit more about the process. My intention for this hour is at noon Central Time. In 48 minutes from now, you're actually going to have clarity about what your book is, knowledge of who the audience is, and some progress made toward getting this thing done. So let's dive in. Oh, and at the very end, I'll share with you a little bit more about how you can personally work with Self-Publishing School. If you're looking for a coach, if you're looking for more mentorship, something a little bit more hands-on, then we can actually show you and have a coach with you to write and publish and market your book successfully. So what most memoirs get wrong is they cover way too much information. There's no lesson learned. They forget about the reader entirely, and there's no creative storytelling. So when they cover too much information, understand that readers have pretty short attention spans, especially if a book is not, if it's all about you, then it's much more impactful to write about key events in your life, not just everything you've experienced. It's really hard to identify as the person telling the story, how much backstory to really give any particular situation. Because there's so much depth in our life when we live it, but we don't want to give all the depth. We just want to give the important depth. There's no lesson learned is you never want the reader to be asking, so what? Why do I even care? You forget about the reader. Understand the reader is just as important as the story being told, especially if you're writing a book that you want people to read and enjoy and share and highly review. Then if you forget about the reader, if you make it too much about you, then there's never going to be a point for that person to read the book in the first place. So we got to understand, why would someone pick this book up? And then lastly, if there's no creative storytelling, I guarantee if you're writing your book and you're like, well, this isn't very exciting, the person reading it is going to feel the exact same way. So you want to write the book that's creative, that you find fun to tell, the story that you love telling, and then people will enjoy that story because you obviously enjoyed telling it. So good news is, probably maybe some of you here are famous. I don't know. But you don't need to be famous in order to write a successful memoir. You just need to think bigger. So thinking bigger The idea that the memoir is not just about you is addressing some of these common misconceptions about memoirs. The first one is, I need to write my whole life story. Second one, a memoir's purpose is to set the record straight. A third, it's all about me and my own experience. Now look at these. Basically, what all of these have in common is that they're written from the perspective of somebody who is looking at it as it's all about me. You know, it's my story. It's setting the record straight for me. It's all about my own experience. And so the truth is, your memoir is not about you. It's about what your experiences and stories can teach other people. And I want to tell you a quick story about this guy named Samuel Morse. Samuel Morse was a painter. And in the 1830s, Samuel got this great contract, a contract of a lifetime. And it looked like he was about to become a famous painter, what he'd always dreamed. And the contract was to paint the war general Lafayette. So Samuel lived in New Haven, Connecticut, 300 miles to the south, Washington, D.C. He was supposed to meet Lafayette. So he rented this studio. He rode his horse the 300 miles down there over the course of a week. He gets to his studio, and not long after arriving at his studio, there's this frantic knocking at the door. And he's thinking, well, Lafayette would be really early. It can't be him. So he opens the door and he sees there's a courier. And the courier says, Samuel, your wife has fallen gravely ill, and you really need to hurry and get home as fast as possible. She needs you. And so you need to pack up. You need to go. And so he has just arrived, but he packs everything back up and he rides the 300 miles back to New Haven, Connecticut. He gets there. He's running across the crunching autumn leaves frantically, throws open the front door to his house. He runs inside. He calls for his wife, and nothing. It's silence. Nobody answers. He goes room to room. Nobody's home. Oh, I thought she was gravely ill. Is she at the hospital? Where is she? So he goes to the neighbors and he says, I've just gotten home. Where's my wife? And the neighbor breaks some hard news. So Samuel, your wife passed away a week ago, and the funeral has already been held. She's already been buried. And naturally, like, Samuel is heartbroken. He's seen his wife for the last time, and he thinks something along the lines of, man, I've been gone for 2 weeks. The courier had to chase me down to give me this news. What if they could have given me the news when I was one town over? So Samuel Morse, he's distraught, and he says, I never want anybody to feel this way again. If there's any possibility that I can prevent this exact scenario from happening to another person, then I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure this happens. And so Samuel Morse, this is in the 1830s. In the UK, they were kind of developing the telegraph. And so he co-ops the telegraph system, creates Morse code, and helps people communicate more easily across vast distances. So sometimes, the reason I'm telling you this is Samuel could tell his story, but Samuel had devoted himself to making sure that nobody that comes after him has to feel the same way that he's felt about the same scenario. So what can our experiences teach other people? What can we do for the generations that come after us? So what is a memoir? It's not an autobiography. It's not the story of your entire life thus far. It's a story or collection of stories detailing a part of your life with a controlling idea or a theme. The controlling idea, the theme, this is something that we're going to do a lot of work on today. Because if you can define this, your book is going to be so much better than it was without this defined. So the purpose of a memoir actually is to share your story to inspire and impact others, raise awareness about an issue or a problem, and to help others. So I want to give you a couple of real life examples of some self-publishing students. Some people that are really cool, and they actually got a chance to speak at our conference a couple of years ago, Author Advantage Live. So this is Justin and Alexis Black. They wrote this book called Redefining Normal Together. How two foster kids beat the odds and discovered healing, happiness, and love. I saw someone earlier say something like, I want to let people know that no matter what they go through, they can still be empowered. That's very much the theme of redefining normal as well. So hang on to that theme, whoever said that, because that's really good. Now they're authors, they're speakers, they're founders of the scholarship expert. They do this Rose Empowerment Group. And it was all about writing this book for them was all about freedom, providing for their family, and charting their own course. And that was the messages that they wanted to have in here. So again, you don't need to be famous to write a successful memoir, as evidenced by Justin and Alexis. Because of their book, they've been featured on some major TV networks. They landed top keynote speaking stages and podcasts. They were #1 Amazon bestseller for weeks, now with over 190 reviews. They won awards, I think maybe 4 or 5 different awards. They have a conference now named after their book, and they're getting bulk order book sales and really just making a great impact with this life story. So it's a planting of the flag. It's saying this is who we are. This is what we stand for. And most of us who writing memoirs with messages recognize that a book is just one way that you can share your message. So a couple of things that they've posted over the last few years since their book came out. We were featured on PBS, sold 256 books today. I absolutely love being an author. The number of doors that have opened, I never imagined. Just checked last month's numbers and we sold 450 books. Mailing out 300 more, redefining normal. We have been awarded our 5th book award. Awesome. And so how do I think bigger when it comes to my memoir? Well, number 1, identify your target audience. Identify your ideal reader. Who do you feel like your story can help the most? When you tell your story, if you imagine the Thanksgiving table, if you imagine a dinner table, who are the people that are up on their elbows leaning in and they just can't get enough? They just want to, they hear the next story. Who's going to walk away from that conversation at that dinner table feeling like, oh man, I heard exactly what I needed to hear today. And when you picture those people, now when you're writing your book, you're writing directly to those people. You're not trying to write to everybody. You know, people are so different. You know, there's probably some of you on here when you heard kind of the conversation I had with my buddy about when he tells me, I forgot to tell you, I believe in God now. You're like, I don't care, you know, and that's not your thing, but that just goes to show you really need to identify who are you speaking to. Include a controlling idea. What is the main takeaway, the lessons readers should have? We will develop this a little bit more. And be selective with specific stories. So know how will each story contribute to your controlling idea. So we'll go back to redefining normal. Their target audience was mainly for readers of faith who have experienced abuse, traumas, and unhealthy generational patterns. So they really got clear on this is the person who's going to get the most out of this book. And then their controlling idea is anybody, no matter their background, can have a life of healing, self-empowerment, and joy. Sound familiar? And so when they tell stories, they become like lawyers making that case, helping people with reasonable doubt realize that anybody, no matter their background, can have a life of healing, self-empowerment, and joy. So Alexis is talking about persevering through her mother's death, her father's imprisonment, you know, the things that sent them into the foster care system in the first place. Justin lived in the poorest section of Detroit before his parents surrendered him to foster care. And it's a story of overcoming. So naturally, there's going to be some hardship. But unless their stories contribute to this controlling idea, they don't really have a place in the book. On writing Stephen King's book, he said mainly for aspiring or seasoned writers or fans of his. So he knows who he's writing to. The idea, the controlling idea is writing is about enriching the lives of those who will read your work and enriching your own life as well. I think most of us are here for reasons that, you know, we would agree with that. And so he's telling stories about childhood memories, his struggling early career, his near fatal accident, all stories which helped shape his writing craft. So he got hit by a car, Stephen King did, and he was laid up for so long, and he was looking for something to do while he was laid up, and discovered writing. So that's kind of cool as an origin story for the guy. So this is one of those slides that you might want to screenshot because it's going to help you with an exercise for defining these things. To give you a couple of questions and help you identify who will relate to the story. Who is the target audience? So who's going to relate to your story? Who can learn from your story? What do they struggle with that makes your book the perfect medicine for them? And what are their interests? So there's a little bit of something that they're running toward, and your book can promise to help them get in that direction. And maybe there's a little bit of something that they don't want anything to do with as much anymore, maybe a little pain. And you're helping them run away from that toward the thing that they really want. So define that person really well. The theme, what are the biggest lessons that are learned in your book? What did this life experience teach you? What do you want others to learn, and what do these stories have in common? And then specific stories, major events, stories from each life phase, stories from different locations, maybe the things that relate to that controlling idea, that theme. These are the stories that you want to include. So hopefully that's pretty clear. If it's becoming more and more clear, I got a few more things to say about the controlling idea to help you identify what yours is. But this will be something that you'll kind of kick around and you'll dig into more. So lesson number 2, learn from fiction writers how to captivate readers with storytelling elements. So one thing that surprises a lot of people, especially the people that are joining self-publishing school and joining one of our 2 programs. We do a nonfiction program. We kind of do like a fiction program. The memoir writers often go into our fiction program. It's much more about a story than it is about telling something that's true. So even though your life events are true, you're going to write this a lot more like a novel than a nonfiction book. So you want to learn from fiction authors and apply some of their principles. Because obviously nobody wants to read or write a boring memoir. And it's really easy to fall into this trap. So doing what fiction writers do, here's a couple of the basics. Number 2, I guess, we'll jump ahead. They show, they don't tell. So they paint a picture with words. They plot with the 5 milestones. So it's kind of the hero's journey. Seems like everywhere you're going to go, you're going to find some variation of the hero's journey. What we use for this is we call it the 5 milestones. And then you weave in your controlling idea. So the theme that ties everything together. So number 1, you outline your book with your controlling idea in mind. You're including only related experiences, and you're really considering your character's conflict around this controlling idea. So we'll kind of dig into this a little bit more. When you write your memoir, and this is the last thing I'll say about this, and I think this will be clarifying, you almost become like a lawyer. And the people that are going to read your book, these people become like the jury. And the jury has reasonable doubt. They're reading your book probably because of this reasonable doubt. And they're thinking something like, man, because of my background, because of my history, my childhood, I'll never be happy. My life is just going to be a series of unfortunate events until I die. But maybe they don't want to believe that. Who would want to believe that? And so they pick up a book like Redefining Normal or like one of your books because they really want something that they relate to, and they watch somebody overcome that thing that has maybe plagued them in their life. Right? So it might be what Justin and Alexis is, but it also might be, let's say the case that you're trying to make is something simpler. A dog is a man's best friend. This will be a really simple example. So you're looking back through your life and you know your controlling idea is a dog is a man's best friend. I doubt any of you are writing this book, and you have a story of a little girl getting off the school bus and both of her parents are still at work, but she's greeted by her dog. You've got a story about this great the tornado, and the dog and the little boy are curled up in the shelter, comforting each other. You've got the story. It's a hilarious story, maybe your best story that you can think of this dog chasing this cat around the neighborhood and like knocking over pots and plants, and it's so funny. You've got this story of grandpa sitting with his dog at his feet, kind of both of them at the end of life, and they're there with each other. And then you've got the family opening up the puppy on Christmas morning. It's like if you only had room for 4 stories. So Lori has a good question right now in the chat. Instead of trying to tell the whole story, it's best to just use a couple related experiences. If you only had a chance to write 4 of those stories, or even 3 of those stories, your controlling idea becomes the filter to determine which ones have a place and which ones don't. You know, you could use this for writing a maid of honor or a best man speech too. It's like, what is the theme? What is the controlling idea? And then I'm going to tell a bunch of stories that contribute to that. So in this case, even if the dog chasing the cat is your best story and it's so funny, it doesn't have any place in this book that says a dog is a man's best friend. See? So whatever your controlling idea is, your life is going to have a lot of different themes. And you can do multiple controlling ideas as long as you kind of compartmentalize those throughout the book. But just help your reader understand what the theme is about and what defines the book by putting some of these things together. Number 2, showing and not telling. So great memoirs have vivid details. They have engaging descriptions. They make readers feel the experience. The one thing that all of us here have in common is that we're all human beings. And so we don't really need to be spoon-fed emotions. What we need is a scenario, and that scenario will inform emotions that'll be automatic. So telling is, I heard footsteps creeping behind me, and it made the whole situation scarier. Showing is crunching hit my ears from behind, accelerating the already rampant pounding of my heart. We get that, right? It's very visceral. It's really real. I just read this book called Never Cry Wolf, and Farley Mowat, hilarious book, also super informative about the true nature of wolves. I'm going to read this paragraph. He says, the male wolf who had been loafing about the foot of the esker after the departure of his wife instantly saw me. In 3 or 4 bounds, he reached the ridge of the esker, where he stood facing me in an attitude of tense and threatening vigilance. As I looked up at him, my sense of exhilaration waned rapidly. He no longer seemed like a playful pup, but had metamorphosed into a magnificent engine of destruction, which impressed me so much that the neck of my flask positively rattled against my teeth. Now, it would have been really easy for Farley to say the wolf was really scary. And so I took a drink of my flask, and I got a little boozed up because I was so scared. But the way that he wrote this, it's not funny, you know, inherently the scene, but I laughed out loud. I thought that is such a beautiful way. The neck of my flask positively rattled against my teeth. So good. So do that kind of thing in your memoir. And lastly, number 3, use the 5 milestones. So the 5 milestones, the hero's journey, really speaks to the DNA of all great stories. It's how we digest stories. Once you get to know this more, you'll start to see it in all of your favorite books, all of your favorite movies. I bet some of you are here and you're like, midway through a movie, I can pretty much guess some of the big elements that are going to come later on. I guarantee that this character is going to have redemption. There's probably going to be this thing involved, because you can kind of see how the seeds are planted and the loops are opened, and then you close all of the loops and it leads to this very satisfying experience. So the 5 milestones helps us organize the plot. It can really help us defeat writer's block. And from the very beginning, it lets people know what kind of story are we here for. And so when you get to the climax, from the very beginning, there's this full resolution. There's this full circle. So there's the setup, also known as you introduce the stable world. And then there's the inciting incident. There's a destabilization of the world. If you think about the things that necessitated Frodo leaving the Shire, you can't go back to what life ever was before. In the inciting incident, everything has changed. But at this point, you already kind of know what the theme of the story is. And so you can tell that there's a little bit of progress in the direction of resolution from the beginning. Okay, I know the theme, but then there's the first slap. There's something that happens that reduces your protagonist back to zero. And it seems like all progress that is made toward the resolution is now gone. There's not usually a whole lot of hope after the first slap. And then, despite all odds, I mean, this is your story, so you're here, you keep on keeping on, and you make a little bit of progress. You're moving toward that resolution. But then, inevitably, something else happens, and you're once again reduced back to zero. Now, some of the best stories don't just have 2 slaps. Sometimes there's 3, 4, 5. The more a character gets knocked down and they keep picking themselves up, the more endearing that character is. Honestly, the more relatable that character is, the more triumph we'll see in the climax and in the resolution. And there's hope at this point. You know, you've seen the character get knocked down and pick themselves back up. You tend to believe that they can actually do what they're setting out to do. And eventually they progress, they move toward this climax, they have this resolution. And so there's ways to expand each of these. You know, if you look at the hero's journey, you look at some of the other things that are taught, you'll find this same sort of model. I think this is a really good way to tell your story, defeat your writer's block, and understand in the end what is actually going to resonate with people. So when they get to the end, they think, that was a complete story there. I really like that. I'm going to share that with somebody. So we're breezing through this. The next part is, what is the process for writing a great memoir? So quick story. About 6 months ago, I met this guy at a conference, and this guy that lives in Colorado, and he was telling me one of his hobbies, his name's Scott, one of Scott's hobbies is getting on his dirt bike and just tearing up into the mountains and getting as far off the beaten path as he can possibly go. So he was telling me about this trip that he took out, kind of riding from Grand Junction just into the wilderness. And he's a pretty good rider, so he's getting back there to a place where you couldn't possibly hike this far unless you use multiple days. Maybe you could helicopter into this place, but he is far off the beaten path. And he sits down for lunch, and as he's sitting down eating some lunch, he realizes there's these weird rock formations around him. And upon further inspection, they're not really rock, they're something else entirely. And he gets down and he's looking at them, and it hits him in a flash. This is a dinosaur skeleton. So Scott has found a previously unseen dinosaur skeleton in the wild. It's literally my dream come true. And I think this is where a lot of us are right now, is we know that we're looking at something and we know that it's really valuable. We know that it's really unique. It's our story. It's something really special about it. But quite frankly, most of it is still unearthed. When we excavate it out of the ground, we can start to see what we're working with in its entirety. But the first thing that we need to do in any great story that we know that we're looking at, or any skeleton at this point, is we need to do an excavation. So you're going to apply the same sort of idea to your book. You're going to first and foremost pull out all the bones, identify all of the things that you want to write about in the story. And obviously at this point, you're kind of considering your controlling idea, you're considering your theme. And then we start to categorize these things, start to see how they all fit together. Then we assemble a skeleton. Once you have the skeleton, that's the outline of the book, and you really know exactly what this book is going to look like, then and only then will you start giving it flesh and blood. So some of you here might think, oh, I'm going to write my book next year. It's going to be a New Year's resolution. We're going to knock this out. I think that would be perfect, because in the next 3-4 weeks, you can be working on step 1, 2, and 3. So come January 1st, you can sit down and you can start writing the book, and you'll be at step 4 already. So that's the flesh and blood. That's writing it. Once it's written, editing, cover designing, formatting, the book production, that's giving it life, and then the book launch is letting it loose. So we're going to kind of dive into talking about mostly steps 1 through 4 today. And so first things first, the excavation, also known as mind mapping, also known as brainstorming, also known as clustering. I wouldn't be surprised if some of you had a different name for this thing. It's one of these skills that we learn in like 3rd grade that maybe sometimes we think, well, writing a book is going to take some advanced tactics. So you overlook the things that you've had at your disposal for years. So let's start. Maybe if you guys have a piece of paper and a pen, this would be a great time to grab that. You create a mind map by writing your book topic in the middle of the page. Maybe in this case, write your controlling idea, write your theme. At the beginning, if you shared exactly what the phone call or the sentence that you hope to be uttered to you about your book, maybe you put that in the center of the page. Tamika says webbing, nice. Yeah, there's so many names. And then what you're going to do is write out everything you can think of on that subject, on that topic. So different stories, different examples, different lessons that you've learned, you know, all of it that applies to this filter. So we're actually going to make some progress. I want to give you guys like 2.5, maybe until 45 after. That's almost a little over 3 minutes. And identify your controlling idea, your theme. If you're not quite there yet, write down what is the sentence that you hope someone says to you regarding the impact that your book has had on them. And then we'll start putting some of the things that you've gone through that will apply in this book. So I'm going to play a song and we'll come back together at 45. All right, guys. So Sharon had a really good question as we were doing that. She said, I'll go back to your question. She said, where is it? I lost it. Are we supposed to write everything related to our experience around the topic? So I think what happens is you write a lot of things on this mind map that you want to write about. You know, all of the different stories, the different experiences, as Lori and Anastasia are bonding over all of the many slaps that you've gone through in your life. And then you might look at these and you might realize that, man, a lot of these have things in common. You know, when I went through these 5 things, that was a lesson on forgiveness. When I went through these 10 things, that was a lesson on boundaries. And what you'll come up with in step 2 is the categorization of your book, the categorization of the different themes. And you'll see that, all right, I thought that I was going to write 70 different stories, but it looks like I'm actually going to write on 7 different themes or 4 different themes, maybe 5 different themes. It's whatever it ends up at for you. You might also find that your dinosaur has a baby, and that what you think is going to be all one book is actually going to be 2 or 3. Once you identify your target audience, sometimes you realize that, hey, these are the themes that are really applicable to that target audience. And then book 2, I'm going to write about this other stuff. So these aren't things that I can really guide you to well here because it is somewhat of an intuitive process. But once you have your entire mind map written out, maybe get a colored pencil, maybe get a marker or something to identify what common themes do you see here. Sharon, that song was called Venice by Jivus, which is Gyvus, Jivus, Venice by Jivus. Okay, so that's the categorization. So here's another really simple example. Let's say that you're going to write your book about, all your favorite foods, and it's going to be a cookbook. And you got all your favorite foods written out on your mind map, on your webbing, and you then identify, man, there's breakfast, there's lunch, there's dinner, there's dessert, there's snacks. And so you categorize these. You have now 5 themes, 5 sections, and about 3 chapters per section. So you got maybe 5 themes, and you've got maybe 3 stories to contribute to that theme, throughout your book. So this will really translate easily once you have that into a skeleton where you know where you're starting and the theme there, and it progresses through your book. And you say, okay, looks like I've got 15 chapters. So depending on the type of book that you're going to write, and I know that I'm moving pretty quickly, if you're going to write a novel, you have sort of this idea of how many words are going to be in your novel. If it's more lead generating nonfiction, traditional nonfiction, you kind of have the different lengths. So let's say that you settle on this idea, I'm going to write my novel, my story, my memoir. It's probably going to be 60,000 words. It's longer than a novella. It's my story. It's going to be not like an epic fantasy by any means, 150,000 words, but like, 50, 60, 70,000 words. I think is pretty good, pretty appropriate for a memoir. Well, then if you knew that you had 15 chapters, then you can take that outline and say 60,000 words, 15 chapters. What is that? 4,000 words per chapter. And every time you're writing about this chapter or this theme, you know exactly how much you're going to write. So that's really what it comes down to when you're adding the flesh and the blood of your story and you're actually writing it, is you get on a schedule, set aside, protect actual time to write your book, and set goals for yourself. So maybe you have a word count goal, maybe you have a chapter goal. You're not editing while you write at all. Notice that in steps 1, 2, 3, or 4, we're not talking about editing. It's a lot more about just putting content on paper, getting it written. You could even consider speaking your book if you're a really good storyteller and you want to do it that way. And as long as you're putting pressure on the system and you're not putting pressure on yourself, this will work really well. So John Updike says, some of the best books you have ever read were written 1 hour at a time. I'm going to guess most of us here have jobs, have kids, have responsibilities. You're probably not going to go get the cabin in the woods and disappear for 3 weeks to write your book. And so you're probably going to do it a little bit more like a Monday through Friday, or maybe a weekend thing where you carve out a couple of hours, you protect those couple of hours. And when the kids are sleeping or before they get up in the morning, you write for an hour, and then you go to work, you do your other stuff. So what this is going to do is when you have an outline and you know exactly what you're going to write about on that day, what story you're going to tell, then you show up to your computer, you say, this week's goal is to write 4,000 words. And, this is chapter 1 of 15. And I'm just going to make progress on this thing. Sharon says, how many words should the memoir be? Really, it's up to you, Sharon, but I think somewhere between, a good range will probably be between 20,000 and like 80,000 words, which would put you at like 80 to 300 pages-ish, which is a pretty big range. 20,000 would be a short memoir, more on the novella side. 80,000 would be more on the novel side, more full length, closer to like 300 pages in that case. So hopefully that helps. But if you have somewhere that you track your word count or you track your chapter goal, I find that Peter Drucker is really accurate. Only what gets measured gets managed. And if you say, my goal is 4,000 words this week, then after you finish writing, put that up on the marker board. How am I doing? And so this works. If you follow these steps, the reason I share Emma Sumner as the example, the case study of following this exact process, is because this is it's not easy, but this is a process that will work if you get out of your own way and you follow the steps. So she was 8 years old. I find that when I'm younger and I'm more of an amateur, I bring a lot less of my own wrong ideas to the table. So I love that Emma wrote this book when she was 8. It's done 4,000 in book sales in 3 months. She's appeared on some TV and magazines as a result of publishing her book. She did a book signing with 10,000 people there. Now, 6 years later, it's got 81 ratings, still making her some money every month for skiing and for sports and for college, all this good stuff. So once you get the manuscript written and it's in its rough draft form, now you move into production. Production is finding an editor, doing self-editing, getting a cover designed, getting a formatter. And then there's the book launch. The book launch, we're not going to talk about this, but the book launch is like the single most important, highest leverage sole activity that, if done well, will forever change the trajectory of your book. It's one of the things that I teach at Self-Publishing School too, is how to have a good book launch. It's the reason my book launched back in September and now has almost 150 ratings on it, is because I did a good book launch. So when you follow these steps, you'll get a book, and it'll be a successful book because people will see it on Amazon, they'll see it in the bookstore, and they'll know exactly that it's for them. When they're choosing between 20 different books and they see yours because you have a controlling idea, because you really know your audience, that person will be walking through the store and they'll say, this is the one that I've been looking for. This is the book that I need. I need help conquering my weaknesses and unleashing my superpower. So I'm going to buy Nate's book, Crush Your Kryptonite. Or maybe it's Olivette's book. She's telling her story as it relates to her anxiety and how she managed the good, the bad, and the out of control, made peace with her anxiety. Chris wrote about his life, seeing things and experiencing things and hearing things as a kid that really confused and scared him, but now has developed into his life as a medium and gaining healing and comfort from loved ones in the afterlife. There's something like 1,700 ratings on this book, and even launched an academy to help other people get in touch with their spiritual gifts. So understanding what your story is a big part of writing your memoir, so that the people who really need it can recognize that they need it. And at this point, I know I threw a lot at you, and there's a lot of little exercises and a lot of things to consider here. And so at this point, people often ask, Matt, can we just have a conversation? Can I just run some ideas by you for like 30 minutes, maybe an hour? Or do you guys actually work with people? Can you take me under your wing? And can you walk me through this process? I really want this to be a good book. I really want to get this right. Do you do anything like that? And the answer to those questions is yes, we do. And that's exactly what Self-Publishing School, selfpublishing.com is. It's a combination of Indiana Jones, Jillian Michaels, and the butler from Mr. Deeds, right? So perfectly clear answer for you guys. It's someone to blaze the trail for you. It's someone to hold you accountable and coach you. And it's someone to make your life a whole lot easier. So in other words, we do step-by-step education for writing, producing, publishing, marketing your book. We do one-on-one coaching. So you actually have a mentor, live weekly group coaching with dozens of authors. So you can kind of pick and choose who's your favorite, who you really learn a lot from. We also, in addition to mentorship, have publishing services, cover design, editing, formatting, you name it. We'll get the book put together, and we'll kind of plug you into a community of a little over 3,000 authors, so that if there's something that someone else is going through, if you're looking for an accountability partner, if you just want to enter into this community where publishing a book is just what we do, that's kind of what this community is. So we got people all over the country, or the continent. We got people all over the globe, 82 countries now, I believe. And so what I've done for you guys here is I've actually, basically for the next 48 hours, we're doing these free sessions where you can book a call, you can chat with me, you can chat with someone on my team. If there's anything that you're wondering about, you want help with your controlling idea, you got a question about that, maybe you're getting ready to produce and publish your book and looking for other things, whatever you're struggling with right now, whatever challenge you're facing, we'll help you overcome it. And it's free. So when I was about 3.5 years ago, on the brink of walking away from writing, at least for a little while, I met this guy who had written 12 books. We literally had one 45-minute conversation where he asked me a bunch of these questions. I got more clarity in that 45-minute session than I'd probably ever had in any attempt of writing my books previous. And then I was able to kind of move forward a lot more fluently, a lot more easily, and have a book done in 3 months. So if you're serious about writing a good book and you want it to be done now, or you want to wrap your head around it so come January, you're ready to go, and you hold yourself to a high standard of integrity, you're prepared to invest time and energy and dollars, money into this book, then book a call. The call itself is free. Generally, though, a lot of the strategies that come out of this call will be like, hey, you are going to need a cover. You are going to need editing, formatting, publishing, launching. There's about 200 million books online now, so there's a few different areas that you'll want to differentiate your book if you really want people to find it. So there would be investment that'll come in the recommendations. Just be aware of that. Sometimes a couple $1,000 seems like some of the most successful books that I see people are putting between like upwards of 5,000 into their books. But this is the link. It's self-publishingschool.com/apply. Call is free. You might get invited to check out Self-Publishing School. You might get pointed towards something else. The primary purpose of this conversation is how can we give you some more clarity and kind of help work through some of your questions. Maybe we give you the trail map and then you can go walk this path and you walk it straight. You know exactly that you're going the right way. But if someone wants a little bit more guidance or they want a little more mentorship or some services, then we have that available too. So when you go to this link, you'll also see it in the chat. I put it in the apply to join the SPS 90-day challenge. This is basically just taking you to the same place, self-publishingschool.com/apply. Everything in this call, the 90-day challenge, what you're applying for there, that's all free, Lori. So no cost to this call. You're going to see a little calendar that says, hey, what time works best for you? Pick your time zone. Pick the time that is nearest to now. We might even have a time coming up in 10 seconds. So maybe pick now if that works for you, or in an hour or two, or this evening. We've got times available. Once you book it, you'll have this little video that says, hey, thanks for booking a call. This video is just saying, hey, put it in your calendar, and you're confirmed. So here again is the link. I'm going to put this in the chat too. I can't encourage you enough. If you are serious about writing the book, maybe you're thinking, oh, I don't want to waste their time. You know, I'm not ready to publish. Whatever it might be. There's probably the two most common conversations that I have in these sessions are, one, Matt, I'd really like to write a book, and I want it to be a good book, and I'd love to know what you've learned writing your four. The other one is, I've written a book, and I'm looking to get it produced and published and launched. I'd like to be selling a consistent, like predictably profitable amount of books. Can you help me with marketing? Yes, we talk about that too. So wherever you're at, if it's at the very beginning and you're working out your story, you want help with your theme, you want help with who the audience should be, maybe you want a little bit more clarity on those fiction elements. What is an inciting incident? How do I set the scene? Tell me more about these slaps. How do I establish my theme early on? These are the things that we can kind of talk about. It's a process of 50 steps, but really for the first 14 years of me writing my book, I would take 9 steps forward and 8 steps back. And I thought, man, if I ask for help, then somehow that diminishes the accomplishment. And so I can't ask for help. I got to figure this out. If I'm going to call myself a real author, I need to do it on my own. And that led to a lot of frustration. It led to me thinking, maybe, I can do a lot of things, but writing a book doesn't appear to be one of them. And so when I finally asked for help, and for me, that was just a matter of swallowing my pride, and realizing that I was engaged in this really faulty belief system. It's like, no, actually, when I ask for help on things, I tend to produce such a better result, and I'm often recognized for that best result. I'm able to showcase what does come naturally to me by getting help with the things that don't come naturally to me. So that's my encouragement. Book a call. It's fun. Like all of us, it's just chatting about your book and your goals and kind of helping you put together a plan to get there. There's not going to be any hard sell. There's not going to be anything uncomfortable about that, outside of just, kind of getting out of your comfort zone. Sharon says, where's the link to register the call? You should find it in offers, Sharon. You can also, I just put it in the chat, so hopefully that shows up. It's www.self-publishingschool.com/apply. You can also, hopefully, I don't know if you're on your phone or something, see it right there on the screen. But yeah, might be on your phone. So you can just go to that link. Yeah, whatever questions you have, we're here for you. While we're still hanging out, any questions for you guys that you'd like to ask in the chat? Anastasia has a very, I love your colorful intention there in the chat, Anastasia. That's amazing. That's incredible. Barbara Ann says, how does one know when one is ready to write? It's a question that you're going to have to kind of look inside, because some of these things, especially with memoirs, look, like some of these stories are not easy to tell, and they're not going to be easy to read for your audience. And that's okay, if you identify your audience really well. But when you write something down, it is very therapeutic, but often the process of writing it down is the process of reliving it. Now, emotionally, and physically, you feel like you're there. Depending on how traumatic some of these things are, it's going to bring you back to these places, but it's also going to bring you back to these places in a place that you're safe. You're in your chair, you're next to your fire, you're drinking your coffee, so you're going there, but you're also engaging in a process of healing throughout, while you go there. So it can be super therapeutic. And I think that's why memoirs can often be some of the best books for people to write to gain healing. And so consider that, Barbara Ann, if you're ready to go there and if you're ready for the healing that'll come from that, and not everybody is, like sometimes it's some heavy stuff, then I'd say you're ready. When that's true, then you're ready to write. And shoot, as far as your second question, some stories are very real, but to some may seem unreal or far-fetched. Just do your best to tell the truth, and you kind of present your book as something that is real and that is true. We can help you with that if you need some help with that. But hey, if people don't believe what is true, then that's not really your responsibility. Lily says, is the cost of an editor included in the price for SPS? The range that I like to give is generally somewhere between 5 and 10 grand. That range definitely includes editing, cover designing, formatting, anything you can think of, you name it, it's included in that. When someone joins our program, though, then we help them find an editor, and we also often help them find an editor at a discounted price. But the actual investment in self-publishing school doesn't include an editor, because sometimes people write children's books, or sometimes people write poetry books, and so you don't really have editors too much for things like that, or the cost of editing varies so greatly across different books that we make sure we negotiate with our editors the best possible rate, but it is something that is separate. Yeah, Barbara Ann, I would encourage you schedule something, and maybe it'll be with me, no matter who it's with in the team. If you really want to have someone who is also a man or woman of faith talking to you through your book, then we'll make sure that happens. And not everybody on the team is, but we can make sure that that you get paired up with the right person. Sounds interesting. You definitely got me intrigued. Christian based, but based on spiritual gifts. But her experiences may be scary. Yeah, I'm intrigued. Schedule some time. Do me a favor. Anybody who's here, maybe you're working on the application right now and you're scheduling time. Once you do that, come back, put "I booked a call" in the chat, and then we can, I can kind of identify who's here that's booked calls, and make sure that you get paired up with someone that will suit you. The questions that you're given in the application do a pretty good job of also determining who should we pair this person with. But yeah, mind those, see those. Any other questions? Walter booked a call. Awesome, Walter. Looking forward to chatting with you. I'll hang around a little bit longer for questions from you guys. Trying to think of some of the common ones. One that I hear, and I don't know if I said this, people will ask, with my memoir, what if I have multiple themes? Can I have multiple themes? You definitely can, and most memoirs do. I'll share in my first book. It's a lot more self-help, I think. It's a perfect meshing of self-help and memoir. I have multiple themes throughout this book, from not blaming other people to setting good expectations, to to not just taking the advice of everybody, because not everybody knows what you actually need. Let's see what else. Yeah, and so then I told a bunch of stories of how, like, taking bad advice led me astray, or one chapter about not needing to be in control of everything, losing control. So nobody asked this question, but if you're wondering, what if I have multiple themes? You almost certainly will have multiple controlling ideas. Leslie booked a call. Sweet Leslie, look forward to that. So I'm gonna come back on camera. I'll hang around for a couple of minutes. Anybody have any final questions? Or are you busy booking your call and getting all set up for that? Because you'll have probably 45 minutes to an hour in that call to ask questions, get paired up with editors, get paired up with cover designers, or whatever it might be. But if you have any questions and it's just like, I only have one question, this is all I want to know, fire away, and I'll do my best to answer it. Thank you, Robert. Appreciate you. I've seen in the chat that, and I might have my timeline on Stephen King's life wrong, that he got into the accident after writing, and that might be true. So I apologize. Fact check post webinar. When did Stephen? There you go. It was in 1999. I stand corrected. All right, guys. Pleasure having you here. I'm going to send out a replay. I'm going to send out my slides here in a little bit. So if you wanted to see any of this stuff again, by all means, you can. Pleasure having you here. Thanks for the engagement. And I'll talk to some of you guys soon. Take care.